Hey everyone, so in this tutorial I want to show you how we can tile this material. We've done this before, but we've done this on very basic materials, i.e. A dirt texture. But I want to show you how you can tile this with something that's a lot more complicated. So this one, for example. So the first thing we need to do is we need to try and crop this to a square aspect ratio. It's currently rectangular. So we're going to go to the cropping tool. We're going to set the ratio to 5 by 5. Okay, so that's going to snap into the center. And you might need to make some adjustments and move it from side to side. So let's just go back to the crop. You may need to move this, but for now I'm just going to keep this 5 by 5 and do this crop. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Filter, Other, and Offset. And we need to offset this. Hey, look at that, it's doing it straight away. We need to offset this so it's directly in the center. So this horizontal line, you can see it's now being pushed to the left. This needs to get as close to the center as possible. So we're going to move this over. This line needs to be directly in the center, so in this case it is. I'm just going to save this just so I can keep that. So we can see this line is now gone further down. We need to try and get it directly in the center. So that's good enough. We can click OK. So with this offset, we now need to try and blend in all of these shapes. So there's multiple ways we could do it. We could use the spot healing brush tool, and we could try and select this entire line and see if this blends in. And it does an okay job at just removing some of the edges, but it hasn't completely changed this image. So this brighter section here is totally different to this slab of wood, so we need to try and change that. So we could use the clone stamp tool as an example. So the clone stamp tool selected, we can hold Alt on the keyboard, select this lighter tone of the wood. In fact, I'll select this one and then just paint this in. Okay, so we're using the texture from that darker side and then just painting this in. We can also use the marquee tool and select a lighter section. We can then press Ctrl C to copy, Ctrl V to paste, and then Ctrl T to free transform and then make this larger. Okay, so I've just held Shift on the keyboard. If you're using the newer version of Photoshop, hold Shift. If it's the older version, don't hold Shift, just drag this out. And then we can use the eraser with a softer brush and just erase that out, just to try and blend these in a little bit more. Now, anything that you copy and paste, make sure you do right click and merge this down, or just flatten the image. And we need to do this for all of these panels. So even this darker section here underneath this panel, I'm going to need to either copy or paste it, or press Ctrl T just to drag this out. Okay. And again, we'll need to do this for all of them. So I'm going to select this texture, Ctrl C, Ctrl V to copy and paste, and move this over. Okay. So it will take some time. If you want to get this extremely precise, then you're going to want to take some time with this. And here we've got a repeating texture when I've copied and pasted that out. So that's where I can use that spot healing brush tool just to remove any of those darker areas. So where the wood is split, I'm just going to remove that with the spot healing brush tool. And then again, use the eraser with a soft edge just to blend these in. And merge them down. And we're nearly there. I'm just working my way all the way down. This could be classed as a separate plank, so I might just paint that with a black brush and just paint that in. There we go. So what you could do is you could use this as a template and then you could paint directly on top of it and create a stylized piece, and then use that as your tile texture. That would be quite cool. Or you could select the image, go to filter and filter gallery, and maybe have a play around with some of those settings. So see what the cutout tool looks like. Dry brush is a pretty good one. Paint dubs. Yeah, there's loads that you could use. That's cool. You could have a oh god, what's the game called? Oh no, I've totally forgot the game that's very stylized. I'm sure you're all saying it anyway. But yeah, we could have this effect. I'll just cancel that. So let's do this all the way down. Merge this. Borderlands. There we go. I've remembered. Let's merge this. So I'm just using a mixture of the spot healing brush tool, the clone stamp tool, and then the marquee tool just to drag these out and blend them in a little bit more. See, we've got a 33 at the end there, so we're going to want to erase that. Remove any numbers. Anything that's going to have a repeated pattern, ideally you want to remove it. So even this little notch in the wood, you're going to want to remove that, because when you copy and paste this, you're going to see that notch all the way down through all those multiple panels. So let's get rid of that. Let's keep this dark area here. Bring this over. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to go back up to the top just to make sure. I think there's this line here. Could do with just dragging that one out. That's a bit better. And take your time with this. I'm just being very quick. Just trying to edit all of these panels. But yeah, take your time. Right, that looks like all of them. So now we've removed the seams from directly in the center and directly from the side. So I'm going to go back to filter, other, and then press offset again. And don't change any of the settings, just press OK. And you may find some areas that need to be edited. So we can see here, I need to just add just a black line there. So you might need to edit this again if there's anything missing. I might just bring that out a little bit more. Same here, but apart from that, that looks pretty good. So now if I go back to my crop tool, and I'm just going to clear the constraints in the crop. If I just bring this out and then just duplicate this, we can now see if I put this directly to the side, then it's tiled perfectly. And I could just keep going. So I could crop up, and it's going to tile up there as well. Okay, so now we have this tile texture. So I'm just going to go back to my crop, and I'm going to save this out. So I'll save this as wall underscore texture. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some graffiti directly on top. So I've got an image online and I've cut it out. So I've just used the lasso tool and I've removed the background. And I've just gone around this and cut it out. I've also used the eraser with a slight soft edge, and I've just gone over the edge there. If I just put the white back on, you can see I've just erased the edge. So I'm going to drag this onto this wooden panel, and I want to try and blend this into the background. So I'm going to press Control T to free transform and just put this in the center. And if I was to use this as a decal in Unreal Engine, it would look exactly like this. It would look like a sticker that's been applied to the wall, but we want to see all the cracks come through onto the wall. So I'm going to double click on the layer. That brings up the layer style, and I'm going to change some of these settings. So with blend if I want to remove any of the darker sections of the image, then I can bring the black forward. If I want to remove the lighter sections of the image, then I can move the white forward. And if I want the underlying layers, the layer that's behind it, to come forward, I can bring some of those darks back. So I can actually move that forward to bring the slats forward. I can then hold Alt on the keyboard, and there's two little tabs here. If you just hold Alt, press the edge, and then split it, then it's going to blur it and blend it into the scene. So I can do the same for the lighter sections, move this back a little bit, and then again, split it, hold Alt, left click, and drag to blend these in. Okay, so now that I press OK, anywhere where I move this image, it's going to have that effect. Very cool. So I'm going to move this into place, and I want to apply this to my texture. So I'm going to save this out as a JPEG again. So File, Save As, JPEG, Wall Texture 2. And I'm going to make a stencil out of this one. So I'm going to select my background layer. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Threshold. And then you'll want to play around with these sliders. Now you don't want it to have too much detail, because it's going to pick this up when we start to convert this into a 3D model. So I'm going to move this back, and ideally all I want to concentrate on is these darker sections of the panels. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Click OK. And if you don't want a hard edge, we can go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, and just do a slight blur to that edge. And then click OK. Okay, so I'll save this one again as a JPEG. This time I'll name it Stencil. Okay, save that. And that's it for that stage. So we've made the tileable texture. We can now tile it. So if we made two different versions, we could make one that had this material, and then the next panel would have this material, and then the next one, it wouldn't have that. So we can totally tile these in Unreal Engine. So we're going to jump into 3D-Coat, and I'm going to show you how we can extrude from that stencil. So I'm going to go to the voxel sculpting and select the cube, and I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to turn this into the orthographic mode instead of perspective, so it should turn blue, sorry. And I'm going to just make the width for the wall, and then click enter. And I'm going to load that stencil. So here on the right hand side, there's shaders, presets, and stencils. We're going to press new and then load our new stencil that we've just made. Where is it? There we go, wall stencil. And when you click it, it's going to want to tile, or at least by default it should be a tile. I'm just going to remove this and select tiling here just to bring back the original texture. And if you left click on these moving sliders, then I can move this around and move it into place. And then this one will zoom in or out. I don't want to stretch this because it was a square aspect ratio, the same as my model. So I'm just going to try and move this directly on top. That looks pretty good. I'm then going to go to Airbrush, and I've got my depth set to 10, and the smoothing is currently at 2, but we could bump this up. Let's try about 25. If I press E on the keyboard and then select the rectangular tool, I need to make sure that the ignore back faces is unticked. Select the rectangular tool, and then just select the entire object. So we can see it's already embossed into that image. Now I can press close, and we can see that effect. Okay, very cool. So we can see it's also extruded out the back of this object. So I'm going to go to cut off and then select the rectangular tool and just cut through this, just to try and remove that. That's better. I'm then going to right click and select to global space. If I just press W and zoom in, we can see that some of these squares have turned into squished rectangles or triangles. So if you just right click and say to global space, it's going to clean up some of that geometry. And for now, I'm just going to use a retopology via decimation, just so we can retopologize this nice and quick. So I'll set this to 99%. In fact, let's do 98%, just in case. I'll click OK. So this is going from 367,000 to 7,000. Okay, so that's retopologized. We can now go to Bake and Bake with Normal Map. We just need to make sure nothing's clipping through. If you see any areas that are grey, then you need to make sure that the outside of the object is greater than the object behind it. So if you see any grey areas, just move the depth outside further. You can click OK. I'm going to set this to Maya. I suppose we could set this to Unreal. It won't make too much of a difference. And I'll set this to 2K. You can set this to 4K if you need it even higher. Just so my computer doesn't explode, I'll keep it at 2K. We'll let that load. Okay, so now I can just turn off my sculpt. You can turn it off in the Vox tree, or you can go to sculpt and just hide it. Now when I go to paint, I've got my model that's now retopologized. So I'm now going to import my texture. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to select the click select color texture. I'm going to select that new wall texture we made. And then click Save as New. I now need to change this from cube mapping to from camera and move this into place. You can also press the reset if the object is either too small or too big. And I'm just going to try and line this texture up with my model. So it's the exact same model as the stencil, so we should be able to line this up perfectly. That looks pretty good. Let's just zoom out just a little bit. There we go. And then use the PhotoBucket, press E on the keyboard and select the first brush, and then just tap on the model. So if I close this, we can now see it's textured the model, and we've got the depth from that wood. So I wouldn't advise that you do this throughout the entire game, but if you want a lot of detail just within that one panel or multiple panels, then you can use this technique. So this is something that you could then save and then use that as your tile. I can also show you the separate materials. So let's go back to Smart Material Editor, select this material and select the graffiti version. I'll press save. And then I'll select the from camera. And I'll try and match the exact same size. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'll just paint directly on top of that layer. And then I'll just close this down. Okay, so that's how we could apply the graffiti to the image through Photoshop instead of using decals in Unreal Engine. So the great thing about that blend is that it's actually going to affect all of the dark areas of this wooden panel. You can see it's actually gone in between this panel as well because we've extruded it. Super cool. Okay. If you wanted to paint anything else on top, so let's say some of the edges were painted red, I could select a different material. So on Smart Materials, I'm just selecting this red material. Okay, let's bake this. I'll create a new layer. And you could use a different brush if you wanted to, so you could paint something else on. Yeah, and that's going to react with the light. And we can also, let's just push all these up. We can set this to something like more on concave. And Jason will go over this a bit more. And it's going to affect all of the areas in between the model. Okay, so I could select that PhotoBucket and then just tap in the center, and all of the areas that are concave will be painted red. Very cool. So say for example, if I wanted metal in between this, I could go to my metal, I could select a gold texture, more on concave, and then paint this, and then all of the concave areas are going to be metal. In the same way, if I wanted to paint only the edge, I can select more on convex, and then just paint the edge. Okay, and then we get this effect. Very cool. Okay, so that was just a quick tutorial. Again, you would make two different versions. You'd make, in this case, one with the graffiti and then one without. When you then export this into Unreal Engine, you can then duplicate them and put them together, and they're going to tile perfectly based on the tile texture that we've made in Photoshop. So I hope that helped, and I will now take you over to Jason, where he's going to do something similar but with a stylized material. Okay, thank you, and I will see you later.